Abney Park's The Toy Shop at the End of the World. Chapter 4, Above the Roof. The next morning it was Chloe's turn to make breakfast, and so Bella slept a little longer in her hammock in the rafters above Chloe's bed. Her view at this height would have been dirty underfloor and moldering wood, if not for the countless drawings made by her and Chloe. The drawings covered the ceiling, the walls, and the rafters, and each drawing was a window into a world they would rather live in than their own, with trees and sunshine and animals and smiling faces. They took their breakfast at the top of the stairs, listening to what they could now recognize as children directing the circus or children directing the battle between the knight and the dragon. One little boy said,
"Where is the princess? That dragon used to hold a princess and now she's not there."
Chloe and Isabella giggled. "That's because she lives in a proper mansion now," Chloe said to Bella in a whisper. When the shop had finally closed, the girls crept up and out of the basement hatch. This time, instead of playing with the toys, they crept into the workshop. The brass giant now sat straddling the work table, as you or I might straddle a bench, hunched over a bit to keep his head from hitting the dangling electric light bulbs. "You're looking much better today, Jerrod," Chloe said.
"Jerrod?"
The machine ground the syllables a bit as he said them. "Isn't that your name?" Chloe asked. Bella crawled up onto the work table between the giant's knees. She pulled out a mechanical winged horse that had somehow found its way into her possession on the short trip from the stairs to the workshop.
"I don't know if it's my name. No one has ever called me a name before."
"But I thought I heard the toy maker call you by that name."
"Father did."
Jerrod looked surprised and pleased, in the same way you might be surprised to find an extra $100 bill in your previously empty pocket. Isabella grabbed one of Jerrod's huge hands and pressed and pulled the fingers until it was the shape of a man and placed it on the horse. Jerrod gently allowed it, and Isabella trotted the horse and the handmaid around the table.
"What is this?"
said Jerrod, meaning the winged horse.
"It's a Unisys,"
said Bella matter-of-factly.
"A Unisys? I don't think I know what that is."
"It's a unicorn with wings,"
said Bella, looking up into the giant's face. "A horse with horn and wings. Unicorn and Pegasus together. Unisys," said Chloe, who had invented the word. She grabbed some broken doll furniture off another table and started to arrange a small home for the Unisys.
"Your Unisys? It needs winding,"
said Jerrod, looking sadly at the motionless toy. "Jerrod, where are you from?"
"Not here,"
Jerrod said.
"I was made in another workshop of Father's, in the tower. That's where I worked before I was let go."
"What does let go mean?" asked Chloe, although she thought she might guess what it meant. She vaguely remembered Father being let go from his work before Bella was born. This is why they had to move into the basement, although she didn't understand how those two events could have been related.
"Perhaps let go is the wrong words. I was holding on. They made me let go, and I fell."
Jerrod pointed with his non-horse riding hand to huge dents and scrapes down one side of his arm and legs. "That's horrible! Why would they do that?" exclaimed Chloe, looking angry and sympathetic at the same time.
"Because I didn't do what I was told."
"You were being bad?" Chloe and Bella now had stopped playing and were both staring sympathetically up into the giant's glassy eyes.
"No, I was being good. For once."
"That doesn't make sense. Why would you get punished for being good for the first time? Shouldn't you have gotten punished all the times you were bad?" Jerrod's glowing glass eyes were changing color from green to a sort of orangish color. The giant's copper face could make no expressions, but its reddening eyes looked angry. Chloe nervously stepped further away from Jerrod and looked around the room at the space under the tool cabinets that lined the walls. But Bella went on.
"Maybe it's because you weren't being a good listener. What were you supposed to do?"
Jerrod sat silent. Then he said,
"I can show you, if you'd like."
"That's okay. I think we need to go," said Chloe, backing towards a hiding space under a cabinet. "Yes, please," said Isabella, who was not seeing the change in Jerrod's eyes.
"Please show us."
Isabella had the feeling that this somehow meant an adventure, and she was not wrong. The giant scooped Bella up in his arms and stood. He unstraddled the work table and in one stride crossed the workshop, then climbed up the iron spiral staircase in the corner. He was really too big for this staircase, and as he climbed, it reminded Chloe of a spider squeezing out of a hole too small for its body. Chloe had no choice now but to follow. The brass giant had Isabella. The stairs opened into a dark, luxurious apartment, obviously the toymaker's. The toymaker must have gone to dinner, as his apartment was empty, save for its threadbare silken sofas and deeply scratched leather wingback chairs, covered in books of science or half-made toys. On the far side of the apartment was a large iron door covered in rivets and locks. The giant held Isabella with one arm while he agilely unlatched each lock with his other hand. He then slid the iron door to one side and stepped out into the dreary hallway, lined with peeling gray-on-gray striped wallpaper. The hall was at least tall, so that Jerrod could stand up properly. This meant his stride was now nearly 5 times Chloe's, so Chloe had to jog to keep up with him. She wanted to say, "Please don't show us how you were bad once. Please just tell us, then let us go back to our basement." But she was now too afraid to say anything. Was this what they had been hiding from? She thought briefly about trying to kick the machine in the legs, to get it to drop Isabella, but Chloe couldn't imagine that kicking iron and brass pipes would do anything but hurt her and leave the giant unfazed. Bella sat calmly cradled in the machine's arm. Halfway down the hall, they came to a small elevator with a painted wrought iron door. The doorway was perhaps half the width of the giant's shoulders, and he sighed when he saw this. Then he turned to continue down the hall. At the end of the hall was a stairwell. Jerrod looked up and saw the square spiral of flights of stairs ascending 20 floors above them. He then looked at the small stairs, built for the stride of a man, not a giant, and again he sighed. Then, most unexpectedly, he pulled Isabella up to his mouth, opened his jaw, and bit down on the back of her overalls. She dangled from his mouth. Jerrod then snatched up Chloe and tucked her under one arm. Chloe screamed, but the machine didn't seem to notice. He put a huge foot on the cast iron handrail and stretched his other arm to the base of the stairs 1 flight above. And so, by pulling, dangling, standing, and stretching, he climbed all 20 floors up the center of the stairwell, completely skipping the stairs altogether. Chloe was in a panic. She had become accustomed to small enclosed places. She found them cozy, like a mouse might find a toilet paper tube cozy. Dangling 20 floors above a stairwell was horrifying, and it made her freckled face red and her eyes fill with tears. One tear rolled off her cheek and fell past the giant's huge steel feet and down 6 floors before hitting the dusty concrete below. Isabella was just waiting to see whatever the giant had to show her. The very top of the stairwell ended at an old wooden door. The door was locked, but the giant pushed his spare hand, slowly increasing pressure until the hinge of the door bent, pulling its screws from the wall. The door popped open then and fell off into blackness. There was now wind blowing in the door, and outside they could see stars, both above and below them. The giant stepped out. They were on a precarious rooftop of an elaborately ornamented Victorian skyscraper. Behind them, the roof continued up like a pyramid until it peaked in an iron spire. Before them, the edge of the roof was regularly spotted with large, ugly gargoyles, mouths open, eyes glaring, and tongues rolling to the side. There were stars in the windy black sky, and the twinkling lights of the buildings all around and below them. Jerrod looked left and then right and then said,
"It must be on the other side."
He turned and walked along the edge of the building, placing his free hand on the heads of the gargoyles to steady himself, with Chloe tucked under one arm and Isabella dangling from his mouth. There were buildings all around them, huge like the one they stood on. They were ornate Victorian or Art Nouveau in design, but coal-blackened and filthy. At the top of many were weather vanes swinging nervously in the wind, or large kites black in the dark of the night. This was the first time the girls had been to a rooftop, and indeed the first time they had been outside in a very long time. As her eyes got used to the darkness, Chloe could see that each city block was contained within a huge wall. The city itself, though vast, was enclosed in the largest wall yet, and past that wall was nothing but blackness. As she watched, the fierce wind tore one of the large kites free of its mooring. The wind carried it up, away from the building tops, and finally over the furthest wall and out into the blackness beyond the city. Then Chloe looked up at the stars, and she thought she saw figures, like specters, even blacker than the night sky drifting far above her. Seeing them made her feel cold. Something deep in the back of her mind, the part children reserve for primal fears unexplained, told her that these specters were why she and Isabella lived in the basement. When Uncle James said, "Don't be seen," it was these specters he was talking about. She suddenly no longer feared Jerrod. The giant rounded a corner and then stopped.
"There,"
he said, and he stretched one arm out to point. Ahead of them, blocking out both city lights and stars, was a tower. The tower. It was so tall that 3/4 of the way up it disappeared into a misty shroud of clouds, only to stab out again above them and continue on up. The top of the tower was ringed in spires, and the spires reminded Chloe of the crown of an evil king she had seen in a very old book. The specters were coming and going from this tower's top, each one dropping a small shadow into the crown, then whirling and flying off into the darkness. There were few windows in the tower, and even fewer lights. Where the lights were on, the girl saw bars blocking the windows. Chloe thought, why would they need bars? Nobody would try to get into a place so horrible as that. Maybe people trying to get out? Surely they'd die if they jumped from such a height. And briefly it occurred to her that maybe what was inside the tower was so horrible that jumping from the window would be preferable to staying inside. She shivered.
"That is where I am from,"
Jerrod said, and he set Chloe and Isabella between two gargoyles before folding his massive legs and sitting down himself.
"I worked at the very top. If you work there, you call it the tower. If you were brought there, you call it the cage."
He paused.
"I have also heard it called the change cage, but I do not know why."
"What are those shadow bugs bringing to the top of the cage?"
Isabella asked with no fear in her voice. She was pointing at the specters, which could now be seen more clearly as skeletal figures hanging from a bloated bug-like armored body.
"Progressors."
"What is a pro-guesser?"
Isabella asked.
No, I'm not sure. That's just what they call them. It has something to do with walls and laws,"
Jerrod said, puzzled.
"What are laws?"
asked Isabella.
"Well, the city has rules called laws. Laws tell you what to do, so that the city can run perfectly and stay exactly how it is, without changing. If you ignore these laws and do something different, you might change the city. It's the job of the police to keep the city from changing."
But maybe the city should be changed. It's not very pretty, or happy, or nice, said Chloe, looking into the darkness below her and smelling the foul, greasy, ashy air. She could hear someone crying in an apartment below.
"Well, if you tried to change it, a policeman would stop you. He would pull you out into the street, and a harpy,"
and here Jerrod pointed towards the specters going to and from the tower's rooftop,
"would grab you in its claws and drop you in the tower."
"Well, and then what would happen?"
asked Isabella, showing nothing but cheerful curiosity.
"That was my job,"
said Jerrod darkly.
"When the progressors are dropped into the tower, they are dropped into a cage. Guards like me pick them up by one leg, and on that leg they burn a brand into the ankle so that they can always be identified as progressors. Then they carry them to the elevators, and they are taken below."
"What's a brand? Does it hurt?"
Bella asked, looking up at the giant's pale, glowing eyes.
"Yes."
"How did you lose your job?"
Chloe asked sadly.
"There was a lady. mother clutching an infant. When she was dropped by the harpies, she held the infant tight to protect it, but she fell so far from the harpies' grasp that her legs bent in places legs don't bend. I think if she would have dropped the baby, she would not have broken when she fell. But she didn't drop it, and when I went to her, she was unable to stand or crawl away. She tried, pulling herself away with one hand, while trying to hold her baby with the other.
Chloe's cheeks were now wet with tears.
I didn't want to pick the young lady up by her legs, as she looked very precarious. I also feared she would drop the infant, and the new human looked very fragile. So I refused to do my job. I knew this meant I was in trouble, as the captain told me to stand at the wall so someone else could brand her. But there is no sense in refusing to hurt a thing, but then allowing it to be hurt. So I stood with my branding iron between the lady and the other guards.
Jerrod sat up tall at this point, and Chloe noticed the color of his eyes had changed from deep glowing green to a now defiant orange.
I pried loose the arms of the first automaton that tried to lift her, and I pulled the arms from its body. I knocked the second to the ground and stood on it, which prevented it from reaching her. Then 3 more lifted me up and threw me over the edge of the tower. I hung from that spire there.
Jerrod pointed.
I was lucky to have caught myself, but they struck my fingers until my fingers broke.
He showed the girls his dented fingers.
And I fell.
You fell from the top of that tower?
Yes.
And you were still alive?
No.
He thought for a moment.
I was never alive, but I am still ticking. Father fixed my gyros and rods and rewound my mainspring. So I am still ticking. And perhaps that's more than I deserve,
said Jerrod. The 3 sat silent in the cold air and watched the specters come and go from the tower's top.